The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NBA Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in the NBA from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NBA Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NBA.
SGA completely took over this game.
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's dive into Oklahoma City being up 1-0 in the Western Conference Finals. This was a stage that the Thunder have clearly not been in with this iteration of this core. They have not been on this stage since 2016. The Paycom Center was absolutely rocking tonight, despite what I've heard that the ESPN audio mix was. It was rocking tonight. And you felt, I think, some of it. I think that you felt some of the tightness from both teams and the pressure from both teams throughout a game like this, where they were missing some shots that they normally make, where they were almost too careful to where it caused them to mess up in certain instances in the half court for both sides. But the Thunder win 114-88, surviving a game that had 9 lead changes and 6 ties, despite it getting out of hand and the Thunder getting a blowout win, leading by as much as 26 points. And that's the big story, is OKC was able to eventually have a run that swelled the lead up to 26 points, whereas Minnesota, for as good as I felt that they played defensively, especially in the first half, they never could string together a run that put them out of reach for Oklahoma City. And that's been a testament to what's happened all season long. And I'm not sure when it's going to flip for people of like, this is just the expectation. This is just what's supposed to happen. This is just what's going to happen. When will you find that security and confidence in this Thunder team? Because every single game, no matter how bad you think they're playing, no matter how bad you think that they're shooting, no matter how many things you think are going wrong, they never get down by more than 9 to 12 points. And they're always in it. They're always hanging around. They're always lingering. And they're always flipping a switch defensively. They're always playing a harassing style that gets you out of sorts at some point. It is inevitable. This team has been inevitable. We've been saying it on this show since November. This is the closest thing to a Thanos snap, just obliteration of a team to their opponents that we've seen to those Golden State Warriors. They just do it in a different way. They do it with defense. They do it with getting you discombobulated, getting you out of sorts, and getting you flustered. Now, it's not as sexy as launching threes like Golden State was doing. And I would say it's not as like surefire, because like Steph and Clay, they're going to hit their threes nonstop. Some of this is like you've got to miss your open threes, to help the Thunder out. And you've got to turn the ball over, which some of that's the Thunder. Some of that is, again, getting you out of sorts to the point where you're making mistakes. But it's bared out now over 82 games where you won 68 of them, and 2 postseason rounds plus a game in the Western Conference Finals where it's been the exact same story, different verse, same as the first. Thunder hang around. They're the better, more talented, deeper team. They find a lineup that works. They turn you over. They get out in transition. They score 30-plus points off of turnovers, and they pull away. And you're reeling, and you're playing off your back foot, and you can't recover. Because they can do just enough offensively in the half court to where then when you add on to that just enough with the 12-0 column in the fast break category and the 31 points off of turnovers, then yeah, you feel pretty good. Feel pretty good about that offense now. And their defense is just suffocating in the paint and at the rim and in the mid-range. And that's areas where, Minnesota should want to be, because the Thunder are just funneling them threes and they cannot hit them at a high enough clip. Minnesota today took more threes in a Western Conference, a conference finals game or later, either conference plus NBA finals. They took more threes in a single game ever in this stage. This Timberwolves team took more threes in a conference finals or later stage than any team ever. and 39 of them were open. And they hit about 12 of them, 13 of them. So when you're missing the threes that the Thunder want you to take, when you're not getting on the glass frequently enough to where the Thunder actually win the rebounding category 46-42, when you're turning the ball over, it's 17-12 in the turnover category, which should have been a bit wider, right? Like the Thunder typically don't have double-digit turnovers, and they typically get you into that 20 mark like they did to the Denver Nuggets throughout this past series. And that's all she wrote. Not to mention the SGA takeover offensively, which we're going to get to, the J-Dub second half, the Chet fourth quarter, the points in the paint, which were 54-20, despite having Rudy Gobert to feed, despite having Julius Randle, despite having a heliocentric guard and Anthony Edwards who can get to the rim at will and get into the paint at will. You kept them out. You shut their water off at what they wanted to do. You forced them into their secondary and thirdary options, and they could not capitalize in that setting. This Thunder defense is similar to a Bill Belichick defense, where it's like, who was your best receiver? He would always take them away. What was your best formula of marching down the field? He would take it away. And this Thunder team does that. Like, you're supposed to be a good rebounding team. You're supposed to be good in the paint. You didn't do it tonight against Oklahoma City because they didn't let you. You look at the fourth quarter from Ant, the game is slipping away. Like sand through an hourglass, these are the possessions of our lives, trying to get back in this game and take game one on the road. He has one field goal attempt. One. In total, Anthony Edwards shot the ball 13 times tonight. That's less than Jalen Williams. That's less than Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. That's less than Dante DiVincenzo. That's tied with Julius Randle. That's only 2 more shot attempts than Naz Reid and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And I say that to say it's not even so much an Ant problem. It's a Thunder defense problem. Because what was happening when the Nuggets season was slipping through their fingers? In Game 7 Sunday in the third quarter, what happened? Nikola Jokic, 1 shot. 1 shot. We have an old saying in Tennessee: fool me one time, shame on you. Fool me twice, can't get fooled again. This is not a coincidence. The very best players on these championship caliber teams can't get shots off when the game is slipping away and you have to have a play. And it forces other guys to step up, and they cannot do it consistently enough. Can they do it to win 3 games like Denver did? Sure. I think Minnesota's going to win 3 games this series. I still believe that. I still believe the Thunder win in 7. But that elusive 4th win is what keeps you from going to the NBA Finals. That elusive 4th win is what keeps you from going to the Western Conference Finals. That's what stands in your way of how can you beat this team 4 times in 7 tries. No one's done it to date, not in the regular season, not in the postseason. And it's because of games like this one, where these misses and turnovers start to mount. Naz Reid has dominated Oklahoma City. His archetype should be brilliant for Minnesota, and it has been throughout this season. He's far and away his best points per game happens against Oklahoma City. He's over 20 points per game against the Thunder this season. He's 1 for 11 tonight, because once the misses start and the 3 turnovers, you just can't stop it. You cannot undo what's been done. You're crying over spilled milk if you're Minnesota. Dante DiVincenzo, every 3 that leaves his hand, I think, is going in. He's 3 for 12. You're forcing guys to play worse than they actually are, and you've got a reputation of being able to do it. And at some point, you've got to just take that as fact. That yes, these shots are open, but they're pressurized in different ways, and you're willing to live with it, because there's going to be a Naz Reid game. Naz Reid, for all we know in game 2, it should be game 2, is going to go 4 for 7 from 3. And Dante DiVincenzo is going to go, 6 for 8 from 3. And you're going to tip your cap and say, well, Minnesota won this game. They did their job. It's 1-1. Let's go see what happens in Minnesota. Like, Minnesota's still going to go do their job, but it's the big picture of, can you do it 4 out of 7 times? And now that you've lost game 1, You have to win consecutive games against a Thunder team that has rarely ever lost consecutive games this season. I believe it's happened one time where they've went on a 2-game losing streak. So again, I still think that this doesn't change the series. I think that it just presents what we've already known about this Thunder team, that they're an historically great defense that puts you in horrific spots, that make you easy to unravel. And you've got to be more disciplined and more mentally focused in this series and not just rely on athleticism, not just rely on talent, not just rely on improvisation. You've got to be on your stuff for 48 minutes, and that's really, really hard to do. It really is. Minnesota can do it. I still believe Minnesota can win this series, but that's just an impressive second half from Oklahoma City to continue to stay true to who they are. And at some point, when people and teams show you who they are, you believe them. You've got to. And it's hard not to believe in this Thunder team right now. They're just something special in Oklahoma City.
The NBA playoffs roll on, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and you place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. FanDuel makes betting easy, whether it's picking your favorites or diving into player props from three-pointers to steals to assists. There's so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. You could use that $5 bet on the Knicks, who are minus 144 to win the Eastern Final. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today.
Game 1, Western Conference Finals loss to the Thunder. We'll talk about what happened.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast.
The Timberwolves' disappointing Game 1 loss to the Thunder. Yes, the final score was, They only scored 88 points. They got blown out by, 26, if my math is correct? Yeah, 26. It was obviously a lot closer than that, but we'll talk about how the game got away from the Wolves in the third quarter of this game. A lot that happened was predictable. We talked about it on Monday's show, on Tuesday's show. It just was a little bit more extreme. When the wheels came off, they really came off, and it maybe the way it unfolded shouldn't have been a complete surprise, partly because of that, or in part because of that. There is some obvious adjustments and some obvious things that really probably will go differently for the rest of this series. Some parallels to Game 1 against Golden State. We'll talk about all that on the show today. First, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. You can also watch on YouTube, and you can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. So the way this game unfolded, what I want to do is I'll talk about how this played out, because I thought there were a couple of key moments in this game where the wheels really did come off. And that is what led to this snowball effect. And the final score is super ugly, but the concern is the 88 points that Minnesota scored. And those moments in which the wheels did come off, why did that happen? So I want to start there in context of the overall chronology of the game. And then I want to get into a couple of other takeaways, and we'll close with individual studs and duds as we usually do on the post-game pod. So first and foremost, the first quarter was kind of exactly what I think we all expected it to be. Minnesota turned it over, I think, 6 times in the first quarter, which is far too many. Obviously, they finished this game overall with, 19 turnovers as a team. Too many, but only 4 more than OKC. The problem is OKC is much better at running after turnovers than Minnesota is. That was the case in the regular season and the case in this game too. We'll dig more into that here in a little bit. That was an issue in the first quarter. Minnesota's still up by 3, but it easily could have been 5, 7, 8 points, except for some of those turnover issues and some missed open threes. That became even more obvious in the second quarter when Minnesota missed a ton of open threes. And yet, with 1 minute left in the second quarter, 1 minute left in the first half, Minnesota was up by 9 points. And it's easy to point to the wheels coming off in the third quarter, but where things started to go wrong was with that 1 minute left in the second quarter. You'll remember, Anthony Edwards actually finally got to the free throw line and made both free throws. Wolves are up 9. Coming down on the other end with 1 minute to play, Jaden McDaniels gets an outstanding block on SGA. Just an outstanding block. And then what happens? In semi-transition, Mike Conley takes up a little bit of a tough shot. It was basically like a 1-on-3 or a 2-on-4 or something weird where they didn't really have numbers. And Conley pump fakes a 3 from the corner, takes a dribble, kind of sidestep to the wing just above the break, and misses a step back 3 with them up 9. On the other end, the Timberwolves get called for a foul, a silly foul on Ant. SGA makes a couple of free throws. Ant splits a pair of free throws. Jalen Williams, J-Dub, hits a shot on the other end. It's a 6-point game. Then Randall loses the ball, and the Thunder score on an offensive rebound with just a second to play. It becomes a 4-point halftime lead. It should have been a 9+ point halftime lead, but instead, in the final 1 minute, OKC goes on a, what was it? A 6-1 run over the final minute of the second quarter, the first half. That is where this was lost. It was just a silly. If Conley hits that 3, they're up 12. If Conley doesn't take that 3, they're, obviously then the Thunder aren't running out the other way on this transition opportunity. That's where things started to come apart for Minnesota. And obviously the third quarter is where things really came apart. To me, one of the key moments was when OKC went small. Is mostly out of necessity. Isaiah Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren each ended up with, I think they both had 4 fouls in the third quarter. And OKC went small. And Minnesota continued to brick threes. They continued to pretty much exclusively shoot threes and miss threes at an alarming rate, which we'll talk about. Alarming and almost surely unrepeatable rate, by the way. And then OKC got rolling, and that's what OKC does. They took the lead, I think, for good with about 5.5 minutes left in the third quarter, and it was just kind of an onslaught at that point. I know by the end of the quarter, Minnesota was a 10-point game, but it was kind of that, like, and Ant picks up his 4th foul there with like a minute to play in the third quarter in a 10-point game. So that's when things really started to go sour, and it was close until the final 3 minutes. Garbage time went all OKC's way. So ignore the fact that the final was 26 points. It really was like a 12, 14, 16-point loss. Fine. Like we can call it that. But in terms of how the game played out, the high turnovers for Minnesota, the points off of turnovers in transition, fast break scoring for OKC, those are both fully expected. The amount of 3-point attempts that the Wolves got, and by the way, not just 3-point attempts, but open catch and shoot 3-point opportunities, especially from the corners, that was completely expected. And to me, and also the grifting by SGA, which we'll talk a little bit about, but SGA getting to the line, 14 times, I believe, in this game. 14 times. That was expected. And then I guess the thing that I wasn't expecting, it was OKC to dominate points in the paint as thoroughly as they did. The Thunder had 54 points in the paint in this game. Minnesota had 20 points in the paint, which is shocking. And there's a couple of things we can blame for that. I actually think the first issue, and Minnesota's half-court defense was pretty good for the most part for the first 2.5 quarters. I mean, they only gave up 44 points in the first half. And OKC was only scoring in transition. But all of a sudden in the second half, the point of attack defense for the Wolves was miserable. Like blow-bys left and right. It wasn't just SGA. Obviously, he was the biggest one. But really anybody, the Wolves were sloppy in attacking closeouts. They were taking bad angles on the perimeter, and OKC was waltzing into the paint. And Rudy Gobert, I didn't think played very well in this game. He ended up only playing 21 minutes. When he was off the floor, the Thunder took advantage. When he was on the floor, it mattered a lot in the first half. There were a lot of neverminds in the first half. He was credited with 1 block. It felt like he had 2 or 3. The first half was pretty good defensively for Rudy, but the second half was not. And then when he was off the floor, it was a layup line. It really was. If you look at the paint on off the court, I'm pretty confident OKC was much better, not surprisingly, in the paint when Gobert was off the floor. He only played 21 minutes of this game, and he was in early foul trouble. He picked up 2 fouls in the first minute and a half, so that's part of the reason. But defensively, yeah, I mean, like, point of attack was poor for Minnesota in the second half. And we can complain about the Shai Gilgeous-Alexander free throw merchant stuff, the grifting. It's a real thing, and it's horrendous to watch. And I bet a Thunder fan, if they were being honest, would tell you that they also think it's miserable to watch. They may not admit it, but trust me, it's a lot more fun to watch Anthony Edwards than it is to watch Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I didn't say it was better than SGA, but it's a lot more fun to watch Anthony Edwards. And I, an honest Thunder fan would tell you that. That's a real thing. And I digress, but I didn't want to get on that soapbox this early in the show, because it's not why the Wolves lost. Again, hear me when I say that. It's not why the Wolves lost. It's gross, but it's not why the Wolves lost. The that was a real thing in this game, but Minnesota stopped playing with physicality in the second half. And I think it was in part due to, being petrified they were going to get called for fouls, whereas Alex Caruso and, other Casey Wallace and others on OKC were not getting called for fouls on the perimeter with frequency for doing kind of the same thing. But Minnesota didn't move their feet anyway, so it didn't really matter in the second half. They weren't moving their feet and staying in front of guys. Like, they weren't being as active, as engaged, as physical on the perimeter, and that's what led to this layup line and all the points of the paint, and really kind of fueled OKC. Ended up, scoring 70 points in the second half, outscoring Minnesota 70-40 in the second half of this game, and scoring 114 points. But Minnesota was actually really good defensively early.
Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. Track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year.
I'm going to tell you why the New York Knicks title window is right now.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast.
We got to reflect on it. We got to talk about it a little bit right after that Celtics game. I meant to do another one of these over the weekend and really dive deep on that. It's been busy, guys. We've been trying to prep for the next series, life to live. But I thought I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention it one more time, right? 0-10 in the regular season against Cleveland, Boston, Oklahoma City. 0-8 against Cleveland and Boston. And it just felt like those teams had the Knicks number, right? We had the fourth game against Boston where they were right there. It took the Jason Tatum craziness at the end of that one, the last second three, for them to force it to overtime, for them to ultimately win. You had the last game against the Cavs where there was no Donovan Mitchell. I believe there was no either Jared Allen or Evan Mobley. They weren't at 100%, and you still lose to them. And the idea that the Knicks ran Boston off the floor, I mean, first time all season they were down by 30 plus points, and are just not even going to have to face the Cavs is pretty incredible. And it's just not a place I did not have a ton of faith in either the players or the coach to not to beat a team like Detroit. I picked them to beat Detroit, but to beat a team like Boston, right? It took Tom Thibodeau going outside his comfort zone in a way we have rarely seen him go outside of his comfort zone. And yet, as I say that, I think it might be a little bit unfair, right? We saw him go to OG at the 5 against the Sixers last year. We saw him make adjustments at times against the Cavs, against the Heat in the Knicks' first extended playoff run of the Jalen Brunson era. But going to all switching was something he had just barely dabbled in the regular season. There were so many areas, like the starting lineup, as we're going to get to, where he's so inflexible. I had my doubts that he was going to be willing to make changes, and yet he was adaptable. And then the other big area was, like, had this team tuned him out? And we heard rumblings all season, right, about the locker room not being 100%. Heck, even this week, you're hearing rumblings about the locker room not being 100% perfect. And yet when it mattered most, season maybe not quite on the line, but borderline on the line in Game 6, the Knicks come out and play what I would say defensively was clearly their highest execution game of the season. They were on point in transition. They were on point in half court. They were catching those ghost screens that Boston just torched them with in Game 5. And it told me that whether it's this team being engaged and being willing to listen to Tibbs, or just them taking it on themselves and saying, like, hey, that was embarrassing. Like, I just, from a pride perspective, I need to do better on that front. They look like a completely different team. And that team, that version of the Knicks that we saw in Game 6, if you get 90% of that the rest of the way, I think the Knicks are going to win the championship. I have my doubts whether they can do that game to game. But we saw a ceiling that just simply was not present in the regular season or in the Pistons series, for that matter. We saw a ceiling with the starting lineup that was simply, like, not really present. Like, there have been 3 times where this team has played like what I would call a championship contender in every year. And this season, the bar might be a little bit lower because of who the Final Four teams are. But it was the fourth quarter against Detroit, the second half of Game 4. You could argue certainly the fourth quarters of Game 1 and Game 2, if you want to extend this list out to 5, and then pretty much all of Game 4, but particularly the second and third quarter, or excuse me, of Game 6, the second and third quarters of Game 6 is where like you see these moments in these stretches in any team that wins an NBA championship, right? Where they are completely dominant. You have teams like the 2017 and 2018 Warriors, right? Where that's all they do. And they are just so much better than the rest of the league. They're constantly at that level. But we've seen it a bunch from Oklahoma City, right? You saw the second half of Game 7, maybe aided by a generous whistle to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. We saw it second half tonight against the Minnesota Timberwolves, right? Where they just elevate to a level that the other team cannot match unless they're playing another team worthy of winning a championship, which in most years, maybe there's an off year where there are 3 of those teams. There's generally only one of those teams that can consistently hit those levels. And for my Dragon Ball Z heads out there, right? It's like going Super Saiyan for the first time. And you get your flashes, the blonde hair goes up, then it falls down. I apologize to people who've never watched Dragon Ball Z and have no idea what I'm talking about. But the Knicks have had those flashes, right? Where their apex is there. I am worried about the consistency against the Indiana Pacers. While the ceiling for this Knicks team is extremely high, I think the floor relative to a team that makes the conference finals is still fairly low for this group, right? And to that point, I mentioned these stats, but I will cite them one more time for the playoffs. The starters are a -5, right? 107.5 net, 107.5 offensive rating and 112 defensive rating, right? Against the Celtics, the starters were almost -10 points per 100 possessions. They got their butts kicked up and down the floor against the Boston Celtics. The fact that they won tells you that, one, Mitchell Robinson and Deuce McBride were both incredible, which they were. And when the Knicks got what I would consider optimal lineups out there, they dominated the Celtics. They owned the Celtics more so even than the Celtics owned the Knicks starters, obviously, because it was in less minutes and they won the series. So you can imagine just how absurd those numbers are. And you look up any of the Mitchell Robinson numbers and they're just crazy every time he was on the floor. But it also tells you the starters are still not a very reliable lineup at this level. I mentioned this in the Tony pod, but the Pacers starters, conversely, a plus 21.4 net rating. And as we've cited it a bunch, the starters for a long time now have not been very good. A negative net rating since Christmas, basically since teams started putting wings on Cat, bigs on Josh Hart, and clogging up the lane, right? We know all that already. So the question I have about this team is we've seen Tom Thibodeau make the adjustments defensively, right? Go more switch heavy, even offensively, right? Run a little bit more action for Mikal Bridges down the stretch of these games. I mean, frankly, they're running more action for Mikal at all moments of these games. Run a little bit more for OG at times. Use Josh Hart slightly differently, right? To try to punish teams for putting a big on him. They've had somewhat mixed results with that. I think if the Knicks and people will be tired of this and maybe rightfully so, because I don't think it's going to happen, but if they lean just a little bit more into 5 out with Deuce McBride, because we saw about 6-ish minutes of that. That's exaggerating. It was like 4 minutes against the Boston Celtics, and it looked incredible. And I don't know how the Indiana Pacers guard Karl Anthony Towns without the benefit of Josh Hart being on the floor and them being allowed to essentially double team Cat around the rim with Miles Turner. Because anyone who watched Cat in the regular season against this Pacers team, in 3 games, he put up 30 points, 12 rebounds, shot 57% from the field, 47% from 3, 89% from the line. The first 2 games were in the first 10 games of the season. Teams were not yet consistently putting wings on Cat at that point. And then the last game, I think, was a case of Rick Carlisle recognizing that, hey, this might be a matchup come playoff time. I don't really want them to have any film of what it looks like when I put Pascal Siakam or Aaron Nesmith on Karl Anthony Towns and I park Miles Turner near the rim. And because of that, and because of the fact, like, Precious Achiuwa started that game. It wasn't even Josh Hart, right? Precious Achiuwa is someone you literally don't have to guard in any situation from behind the arc. And yet they were letting Cat go one-on-one. And it was no Miles Turner that game. So he was bulldozing Thomas Bryant, absolutely cooking the poor guy. I think I have the numbers somewhere in my notes. It's buried. Oh, here we go. Cat had 40, 12, 5 assists, 3 blocks, I believe. That same game, Josh Hart at 30, 10, and 5. So take from that what you will. Point is, if you play deuce, they cannot play that strategy. They have to guard Cat traditionally, unless they want to risk leaving Mikal Bridges and OG and OB wide open all game, which maybe they will, given that those two haven't shot great. I don't think you do that because they're both elite 3-point corner shooters over the course of their career. If you force them to guard Cat straight up, I think the Knicks would win this series. And that is probably an oversimplification, but it also has to do with the benefits you get of being able to put deuce on Tyrese Halliburton, which I'll get into a little later in this episode. You could also go the other way and go double big. Indiana is not a very good defensive rebounding team. We talked about that a little bit with Tony. They are 10th in the playoffs out of the 16 teams that made the postseason in contested defensive rebounding rate. Like, what percentage of contested defensive rebounds do they win? They were 26th, if I'm remembering correctly, in the regular season in that stat. Mitchell Robinson right now is putting together on a per-minute basis the best offensive rebounding season in the history of playoff basketball. Not in the last 10 years, not in the history of the Knicks, just in the history of the NBA. He's putting together the best per-minute offensive rebounding season or playoff run in history, and that's coming off a million injuries. So that is just incredible for Mitch. I say that to say it is a risk for the Knicks to play double bigs and crash, right? Because I think in the half court, with all the actions Indiana runs, they are going to be able to pick on the Knicks when those two are on the floor. It is not going to be like Boston, where Boston played for a team that is known for being hyper modern in their shot diet. They played Neanderthal ball. I think Prez made a similar reference when he was on this pod the other day. They did not play smart. They did not run multiple actions at Towns or Mitch. That will not be the case with Indiana, and they're going to hurt you defensively. That might not matter if the Knicks get every single offensive rebound, and Indiana just has no chance to keep them off the glass. And I think that is going to be a real struggle for them if the Knicks go all out offensive rebounding, especially where we've seen an uptick from OG Anunoby in that area. We've seen an uptick from Mikal Bridges in that area. Obviously, Josh Hart, when he's on the floor with those guys, can really hurt them. And it's a risk, right? Because if they do get the ball and everyone's crashing, they're going to get some transition threes. And again, in the half court, they're going to hurt you. So that is a really fascinating battleground to me. And it's why out of the two, quote unquote, optimized Knicks lineups, I would lean more towards 5 out. We have seen it. DJ Zulo had this number 7 minutes in total in the playoffs so far. So I have my doubts. And there might be a point though. And Benji Ridholt, shout out to him, made this point in the KFS pod, where the Knicks are down 3-1 in the series and Tom Thibodeau's pushed there. I would prefer if they were proactive and they didn't wait until they were down. Because I think even if you do play the best lineups, I think Indiana's good enough to give them some trouble. I just say that to say I do think there's a pathway where the fact that the Knicks just have better top end talent than Indiana. Let's say that. I think Indiana is more complementary. I think I'm saying the same thing over again, but they fit together better than the Knicks do. They have better depth than the Knicks do. The Knicks starting 5 is more talented in just every single sense of the word than the Indiana Pacers is. That doesn't mean the Knicks will win the series if they don't play smart and they don't play their best. And I think if the Knicks lean into their best lineups, if they play smart basketball, I don't only think they could beat the Indiana Pacers. I think they have a chance to win the NBA championship.